Hey everyone! So today I'll be responding to Vaush and his position on veganism, which was brought to my attention by one of my subscribers. Vaush is a leftist YouTuber who supports the idea of animal liberation, but doesn't believe that anyone has a moral imperative to be vegan. He views veganism as a moral virtue rather than an obligation. His core argument is that because there is quote-unquote no ethical consumption under capitalism, he's not committing an immoral act by purchasing animal products. He uses the Marxist concept of alienation as a justification to continue purchasing products that he knows involve violence and exploitation, which he claims he's against.
In fact, I'd probably go so far as to say that all of the misery humans have ever inflicted on one another throughout history probably pales in comparison to what we're doing to animals right now.
Okay, all right. So you're like fully all the way there then. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually what, like, in the future, this is probably going to be remembered alongside like the Holocaust.
Sorry, go ahead. My bad.
Yeah, like it's actually unforgivably bad. My argument here, and this is one of defending hypocrisy, so I recognize my bias in this respect. But the argument that I would have here is comparable to the argument I would make for not, for example, telling people not to buy t-shirts that were made in China. It's that we live in a system of such unfathomably inhuman production, and it's so convenient to adhere to the unethical modes of production in which we live that I don't know if I can condemn a person ethically on an individual level for participating in systems that are so much larger than them. If I ever had the institutional power to do so, I would annihilate the meat industry and strike it clean of this earth, so no one could have any. I believe in everything that you believe in. The only difference is I don't believe we have an ethical obligation to personally abstain from the products of unethical industries. We have to agree there are degrees of separation here. For instance, obviously, to kill a person, unjustified bad. To fund a person killing someone, unjustified bad. To buy a widget from a corporation that uses its funds to perpetuate like murder and such, it's bad, yes, but we've obviously removed. You wouldn't call that person a murderer. So the question really is whether or not there are enough degrees of separation between, say, the meat factory industry, the meat farming, or say slaves mining up lithium in the mines of Africa. If there's enough of a difference between me and them, that I can't be held morally culpable. I believe that the consumption of commodities, even if the production method of those commodities is unethical, is done in a way which alienates us from the ethical consequences. So, like, for example, I don't think a person is committed an immoral action for buying a t-shirt from Target, even though they're financially propping up an institution that procures those goods through massive levels of exploitation in the developing world. So my argument here would be that what we do to animals is bad, and we should work to reduce the harm that we produce with regards to that. But I don't believe it makes one immoral to not do so. The core point for me, and this is why this is important to me, is because I have always been an advocate for the idea that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. That no matter what you do, the effort of desperately trying to find the right brand or the right company that produces their goods in the most ethical way will do nothing but strip you of money and time. It's also a misattribution of goals. You shouldn't be looking to live the most ethical life under capitalism. You should be looking to end the unethical system in which you're trying to make these choices.
There are a few problems I have with this position. For one, saying there's no ethical consumption under capitalism was meant to expose the flaws in this idea of conscious capitalism. It was not meant to justify any and all consumption. The point is that we can't place all of the responsibility on the consumer. Capitalism is inherently exploitative, and no matter how conscious you are as a consumer, you can't avoid participating in this inherently exploitative system. To buy exclusively organic, plant-based, fair trade, ethically made consumer goods is not accessible to the working class. To place the blame solely on consumers for demanding products made with slave labor allows producers to evade responsibility. How I've always interpreted there's no ethical consumption under capitalism is that it's not simply a matter of supply and demand and voting with our dollar. We have to fight for structural change as well. Key phrase, as well. In addition to voting with our dollar, we need to organize and overthrow capitalism.
But I think that a top-down approach, which treats not the consumers as unethical for their purchases, but the producers as unethical for their decisions, I think that this is a more broadly effective way of dealing with systemic injustice.
Well, surely doing both would be the most effective, right?
So I'm not disputing Vaush's assertion that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. I'm disputing his interpretation. Vaush is interpreting there's no ethical consumption under capitalism to mean there's no such thing as unethical consumption under capitalism. These are two very different things. While it's true that participating in capitalism will cause some degree of harm, it's also true that causing less harm is preferable to causing more harm. When you know that a particular consumer good involves violence and exploitation, and there's an alternative available to you that involves much less harm in its production, then it's unethical to choose the former. Vaush made this point numerous times that vegans place such a high importance on boycotting animal products, but don't apply the same ethical standard to other consumer goods, such as clothing produced in sweatshops.
Because right now, like, we purchase electronics and clothing that are propped up on literal slave labor, and no one really seems to give a fuck about that. If we apply the exact same threshold deontological standard that you just applied towards a person eating meat and participating in a horrid industry, I could say the exact same thing about, again, wearing clothes made in sweatshops or using electronics with lithium mined by slaves. These systems, the sweatshops and the slavery, probably not nearly as bad on like a total well-being scale as factory farming, just in terms of the total amount of harm being done to living sentient creatures. But I still think they're applicable in you know, at least in an exampled sense.
If I were to stop eating meat, I would also have an obligation to not buy t-shirts from Walmart or something, right? Is that like the kind of thing you're saying?
I think that the two arguments are one and the same. If you felt that you were unethical for eating meat, I think you would feel unethical for purchasing a t-shirt from Walmart, yes.
It seems like on your position, you're saying that it's justified in the meantime to actually pay money for people to be stabbed in the throat. Right? I'm not seeing how that's the case. It seems...
Again, in the same way that it's justified for me in the meantime to go out and buy a TV set from a corporation that steals wages from their employees, steals excess labor, and then has all of that shit constructed over in China to people who have suicide nets placed outside their fourth floor sweatshop. These arguments are identical to me.
Right? I don't think that in the meantime you're justified in paying for an animal to be stabbed, or a human, in your case, to be stabbed in the throat.
But you haven't explained to me then why you believe that this is true, but you don't believe that people should apply the same standard towards buying commodity goods made under a capitalist system.
To this, I would say he has a point. I was vegan for several years before I realized that I was a hypocrite for supporting the fast fashion industry. Like I said before, when you know that a particular product involves exploitation and there's an alternative available, why would you choose the one that causes more harm? Today, I hold this same standard for all consumer goods, which is why you won't catch me shopping at Forever 21 or H&M. All of the electronics I've bought in the past several years, including this camera and microphone, have been secondhand. I want to be clear that I'm not perfect. I've bought stuff new that I didn't need, or I probably could have found secondhand. But I'm not trying to justify my actions as morally neutral because there's no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism. When you choose a consumer good out of convenience over an alternative that causes less harm, you're making an unethical decision in that moment. Does this make you a bad person? Of course not. Good people make selfish decisions from time to time. I was talking about this with a friend the other day, and she admitted to buying paper towels and pre-washed greens packaged in plastic out of convenience. Obviously, I don't think my friend is a bad person, but the reason she brought it up was because she felt guilty about it. So yeah, I would say the act of buying paper towels when you could just go to the thrift store and buy a bunch of hand towels is unethical. Buying prepackaged greens is an unethical decision if you have the time and ability to wash and prep them yourself. Of course, there are degrees of unethical behavior, and this is probably on the lesser end of the spectrum, but you get the point. The definition of veganism includes the qualifier as far as possible and practicable. This is an extremely important addendum because what is possible and practicable for some may not be possible and practicable for others. An example that comes to mind is personal hygiene products like shampoo, deodorant, and toothpaste. Vegan and cruelty-free options are generally more expensive. If you're on food stamps pinching pennies, then buying exclusively vegan certified products might not be practicable. Veganism is a philosophy, not a puritanical cult. If someone genuinely seeks to exclude all forms of animal exploitation as far as possible and practicable, they're vegan, even if they occasionally purchase products that don't have the vegan stamp of approval. What it comes down to is necessity, the feasibility of alternatives, and being honest with yourself about what is possible and practicable. I think to be super rigid about animal products, but lenient when it comes to other consumer goods, is inconsistent. In other words, it's hypocritical to be a super strict vegan, but then a mindless consumer of clothing and electronics produced in sweatshops. To be consistent is to be anti-capitalist and to strive to cause the least amount of harm to human and non-human animals. Ultimately, capitalism is not conducive to animal liberation, and consumerism, materialism, and carnism are incompatible with socialism. Quick note for those who aren't convinced that boycotting sweatshops is the right thing to do. Arguments in favor of sweatshops are very pro-capitalist. If we boycott sweatshops, then we're leaving the people worse off because we're taking away the best available jobs. But it's not like we're doing a charitable thing by supporting Nike or H&M. We are funding exploitation. It's like when carnists argue that we're doing the animals a favor by breeding them into existence. They should be grateful because we gave them life. Yeah, to exploit them. I understand that a boycott is not the solution. Overthrowing capitalism is. But it seems wrong to contribute to the consumerist materialist system that is destroying our environment and exploiting workers. Secondhand alternatives are abundant, so why choose to support fast fashion, for example? In the short term, these people might be worse off because we're taking away these jobs, but we have to look at the end game. And the other thing is that I'm not personally responsible for the economic situation in Bangladesh. So if sweatshops go out of business, then the resulting economic hardship isn't my fault. Whereas I am responsible for what I purchase. If I fuel the demand for fast fashion, I'm at least partly responsible for the human rights abuses and environmental destruction. So to reiterate, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism doesn't mean that there's no such thing as unethical consumption under capitalism. To really drive this point home, the fact that the fruits and vegetables we buy were likely picked by migrant workers receiving unfair wages doesn't make purchasing plant-based products morally equivalent to purchasing animal products. Animal agriculture requires far more land and resources than plant agriculture. Violence is inherent in the production of animal products, but it's not inherent in the production of plant foods. And of course, let's not forget that animal products were also produced by migrant workers receiving unfair wages. Now I want to get into what makes something a moral imperative rather than a moral virtue. In Vaush's view, going vegan is morally virtuous, but not obligatory.
So my argument here would be that what we do to animals is bad, and we should work to reduce the harm that we produce with regards to that. But I don't believe it makes one immoral to not do so. Like donating, for example. Like, should we donate money to charity? Yeah, probably, if we can. But does it make it immoral of us not to? Well, I wouldn't make that argument. So you walk around the street and you see a homeless person, right? And you can drop them a 20 or you can not. it's probably a good thing to drop the person at 20. I think most people would agree, right? They probably need it more than you do. But I wouldn't, if we walked by and you didn't give them a 20, I wouldn't like say like, hey dude, what the fuck? I thought you're supposed to give them a 20. What the fuck, dude? And for me, the reason for that is because there isn't necessarily a perfect syllogy between what makes something good and what makes something immoral if not done.
His reason here is faulty because he's comparing a non-action with an action. His example of a morally virtuous act, giving money to a homeless person, is akin to participating in animal rights activism or donating to an animal sanctuary. Simply being vegan and not consuming animal products is akin to not slitting the throat of every homeless person you walk past. Not killing is the moral baseline. I talked about this in my response to Joe Rogan and Kyle Kulinski, but we all have some level of personal responsibility. Of course, capitalists have emphasized personal responsibility to the point where leftists recoil at the phrase, but it's important that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. While emphasizing that structural change is needed and that producers hold the greatest share of responsibility, we shouldn't dismiss the importance of individual efforts. To say that one person doesn't make a difference and individual efforts are a drop in the bucket is disempowering and conveys a message of helplessness. It also validates inaction. As an individual, going vegan is more of a symbolic gesture than it is a direct influence on supply chains, but taking a symbolic stance has social influence. If you are unwilling to change your consumption habits, you're putting fleeting pleasure and personal convenience above the suffering of other sentient beings and the health of our environment. You are modeling the behavior that you despise. This is exactly what socialists like Vaush loathe about corporations. They value short-term profits over people and the planet. How can we demand big change when we're unwilling to make small changes in our own lives? I know going vegan may seem like no small change, but it's all about perspective.
This is why I don't like this argument. The argument I just made, mind you. I don't know if it's a valid one or not, but I can't know because I'm so steeped in bias, because I really fucking like eating meat and dairy. I could do without meat. Dairy, I fucking live for. I'm lactose intolerant. I don't give a fuck. I eat so much dairy every day, and I pay for it every day, and it's all worth it.
You really think that it's so much harder to go vegan? That
I could do without meat pretty easily. I cannot imagine not having access to dairy products. I have tried your vegan food. It disgusts me. I am a fat boy. I do not know how well I would do over. I feel like it would make me cranky and miserable. But if it's the ethically just thing to do, that's not really a fair argument.
Kyle admits that he's lazy and likes junk food. The good news is you can still be lazy and eat vegan junk food. There is a whole world of dank vegan food out there that you're just not aware of. You like cheeseburgers, I hear you. I didn't go vegan because I didn't like the taste of meat. I used to work at Jersey Mike's Subs back in high school for like 3 years, and I told my friend, who was a vegetarian at the time, that I could never give up meat. I loved Chick-fil-A, bacon and eggs, cheese, all that crap. And I can honestly say, after 6 years of being vegan, I don't miss any of it. I can easily satisfy all of my cravings with vegan alternatives. Taste is all about preparation. Raw meat is not appetizing to the average person. It only tastes good after it's properly cooked and seasoned. Taste is also cultural. It's what you've grown accustomed to. You don't actually crave meat, dairy, and eggs. You crave textures and familiarity. And food scientists are becoming increasingly better at imitating animal products. So fortunately, you don't have to give up your favorite foods. You can still eat pizza, cheeseburgers, ice cream, nachos, you name it, there's very likely a vegan version. I know you're probably incredulous that these mock meats and stuff truly replace the taste that you're used to. But if millions of people can attest that they're on point or at least tasty in their own way, then you're bound to find some that you like. Just remember that if one particular brand and flavor of vegan ice cream doesn't live up to your standards, don't assume that vegan ice cream is subpar. You gotta try them all. If you've had a bad experience at a Thai restaurant, for example, that doesn't say much about Thai cuisine. So similarly, if you go to a vegan restaurant and you don't like it, it doesn't say much about vegan food in general. Crappy, mediocre food is crappy and mediocre regardless of whether it's vegan. I will admit that some vegan cheese tastes like ass, but don't knock it until you've tried it all. As a general rule, stay the hell away from Daiya. Follow Your Heart is a great brand, particularly the smoked Gouda slices. Miyoko's mozzarella is a gift from the gods. And if you don't feel like cooking, Amy's frozen pizza is 10 out of 10. And fair warning, these products are a bit pricey, so you might want to cut back in other areas if cheese is something that you can't live without. You save a lot of money when you shop exclusively secondhand and adopt a minimalist lifestyle, so it balances out. In conclusion, systemic change won't come without individuals setting a precedent. We can't wait around for the system to be overthrown before we start making changes in our own lives. To quote Greta Thunberg, "Why waste precious time arguing about who or what needs to change first? Everyone and everything has to change." Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and tweet this at Vaush so he sees it. Alright, peace out. Today, I hold this same standard. Jesus Christ.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, nah, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them